Hey guys, Jay here and welcome to another cosplay tutorial. So this month is going to be something special, just like last month where I did two things from the same thing. This month I'm also doing two things from one series. And those are the Hylian Shield and Master Sword from The Legend of Zelda. So specifically, these ones are from my favorite Zelda game, which is A Link Between Worlds for the 3DS. And today I'm going to be working on the Master Sword. Since the tutorial for the shield was before this one, I'll link that down in the description as well as the card up in the top corner. Now, something I should mention really quick is you'll notice how big this sword is. It's not your general Master Sword like you see in stores or anything. Those are normally a lot thinner. I mean, those are inaccurate. But even then, the Master Sword in like Twilight Princess or Skyward Sword or even Breath of the Wild, the 3D games, they're all a lot thinner than this. They're probably about the width of just the face itself without the bevels. Just, you know, that thick. That's because the actual sword model in-game for A Link Between Worlds is really weird, and I'll post that up on screen, but it's just really odd, and I didn't want to make that. And then the Figma looks a lot more like the generic Master Sword, so I wanted to do something in between both of those. So I made it a little bit bigger on purpose, but you don't have to do this. You can take the pattern and edit it if you know how to do that, and just make the width smaller if you really want to. That's totally fine. Or you can actually, on the blade face, if you really want, you can cut off the bevel like I do in the tutorial, and then make that your bevel line and draw in a line where the face will go, where the bevel starts, and then cut that out, and you'll have a thinner blade. That's pretty much all you have to do if you want a blade that isn't this big. But this is specifically to be cartoony and huge on purpose. And speaking of the pattern, if you want to make this for yourself, you can get that down in the description. But anyway, let's get started. I trace and cut out the pattern 3 times onto some 5mm foam. And I leave the wing part of the crossguard on the template so that this part and the blade are one full piece. You can make them separate if you want, but I just felt like doing this as a single piece. I folded the template in half to mark the center on one of the layers. This is going to be where I cut out about 1/4 inch out of the center to fit a core inside that'll stiffen the sword. And that core will be this water valve key, with both ends cut down to the right length to fit inside the sword. You can see on the sword that the cutout, when layered on top of another piece, makes a trench for this to fit right into. I start on the wing details of the crossguard now. With this sword being directly from A Link Between Worlds, it has a slightly different look to it. I found a design that I liked on Google and altered the shape a little to fit what I wanted. But the wing sections of the crossguard look like multiple panels layered on top of a base. I cut out the shapes from the template, traced one full piece onto each side, meaning 4 in total, then separated it into the top layers, and cut those out as well. And all of these were done from 5mm foam. I used the Dremel to round off the edges on the top layer pieces. They all now have a roughly 45-degree angle slope to them on all sides. I test fit the piece by taping the layers together. Now I get to work on the pyramid details that connect the base of the blade to the crossguard. This took several tries to get right. If you can, I would say make a mold and cast these. You'll get much better looking pieces, but I can't do that, so I needed to find the right piece to cut out to get it to look right. What I ended up with is what will be on the pattern. Just cut it out with the knife on an angle pointing inward and making sure to glue the pieces together correctly, and it should work. I use contact cement to glue all the layers together. I start with the blade and glue the center layer to one of the other layers. And I use 2 coats of cement whenever I use it because the first layer always soaks into the foam. And before I glue on the other side, I use a Dremel on the trench to carve a little bit of foam out of the other layer because the metal core is actually thicker than 5mm, so it'll create a bulge. Doing this will remove enough foam that the core has more room to fit better. I only need to do it to this one side because I need to remove about 1mm, so it's not that much. After that, I glue the 3rd layer on, which covers the core and brings the blade to the thickness that I want. I used more contact cement to glue the details of the wing design together, as well as contact cementing them onto the base. I didn't film it, but I used a reciprocating saw to cut the core down to the right length. I used a hacksaw the last couple of times, but that took way too long, and this only took a few seconds. It's also not glued in yet. I need to put a large bevel into the bottom of the wing details, so I start by eyeballing where the bevel needs to start, and marking that with a silver Sharpie. Then I can take the razor knife and carefully carve away at some of the foam to get the bevel started. Then I use the Dremel to finish the job and get a nice even bevel all the way down. And I do this on both sides. The last parts that I have to make, other than the handle, are the circular details that go on either side of the handle itself. I wasn't sure how this was even going to happen, but I've seen some other prop makers use some foam tools that I've never used before. One is for cutting out circles and the other is for making holes, so I bought them for myself. The circle cutter is a little confusing at first, but I got the hang of it really fast. You figure out the radius of the circle that you need to cut out and set the blade to that measurement, and then it works very similar to a compass, where the pointy center it rotates on would be the center of this tool, and the pencil that marks the circle would be the blade on this tool. I folded the template piece in half to find the radius, set the tool, and cut out the circles. I think it took 5 or 6 circles of 10mm foam to make up the height for the upper piece, and 4 or 5 for the lower piece, which is actually called a pommel. Also, I needed holes in the center, so what I ended up doing was marking where I wanted the center to be with a Sharpie, and then centering the tool on that, because there's a centering pin on this tool, then cutting the circle out, and using that Sharpie mark to denote where the hole needs to go, and using the other tool, the hole drill, I drilled a hole right where the mark was. I glued all of the layers of circles together with more contact cement, using a 1/4 inch dowel to make sure that the center holes were all lined up. Once those dried, I marked with a Sharpie where they needed to be sanded to get the right looks. By the way, I forgot to mention, the top piece is 2 sections. I split it up where the first part flares out and comes back to the lower section. I believe it's 4 layers for the lower section and 2 layers for the upper section, and it's all 10mm foam layers. Anyway, like I said, I marked where the slopes start, and I did the same thing as the bottom of the crossguard, where I used a knife to cut away a lot of the foam and then sanded it into the right shape with a Dremel. This took a lot of sanding, but it did work out. I needed to figure out where to cut away at the very top of it to let the crossguard fit into it. To be honest, this was mostly just guessing on the cutouts, and it just happened to work. It's a large V cutout that the bevel of the crossguard will settle into. Then there's another small one going perpendicular to that one that the pyramids slot into. This may take some trial and error, so you'll want to test this out before gluing the 2 sections together, just in case you have to redo the top section. The handle is PVC pipe. Now you can do whatever you want here. The best option would be to get a 1-inch PVC pipe, then attach it by using some kind of resin or something around the metal core inside, and just keeping the whole thing centered until it cures. But I have no idea how to do that right. So I used 2 PVC pipes that fit into each other. One is 1/2 inch and the other is 1 inch. Then I wrapped tape around the metal core until the 1/2 inch pipe fit snug, then taped around the 1/2 inch pipe until the 1 inch pipe fit. And for right now, I'm just putting everything together with no glue for testing. The handle has a design that looks like a bunch of diamond shapes cut out of it, so I cut it out of the pattern, figured out how wide I had to make it so that it wrapped around the handle, and cut it out of 5mm foam and contact cemented it on. I decided to glue the 2 PVC pipes together now, so I do that with Gorilla Glue. I also used the Dremel with a cone-shaped grinding bit to try to smooth out the sanded areas. The areas that needed it most were the 2 parts that used all of the circle cutouts and shaping with the sanding drum. Sanding makes foam have this weird fuzziness to it, so doing this gets some of that out without removing more foam. For the blade, I wanted to use more 14mm foam wedges. These are actually 1mm thinner than the blade, so I have to be really careful trying to put these on. I used contact cement, but I think next time, if I do this where it's 14mm wedges on 15mm, I'll try super glue because it's very hard to do this with contact cement and not screw up. There are very clearly a few areas where I didn't line them up all that good. I would use 15mm wedges, but the only place I can find them is from Blick, and they're like double the price, which adds up a lot. 4 14mm wedges from TNT Cosplay only cost $14.76 before shipping, while 4 15mm ones from Blick are $24 before shipping, so you can see why I didn't buy those. I think in the future though, I'll be using 6mm foam for the center layer of these kinds of swords and 4mm on either side of it, which will be 14mm and match the wedges, rather than the 15mm I get with 3 5mm layers. The last bit of detail I need to add is the Triforce on the blade faces. You can do whatever you want, but all I did was cut out 3 triangles and super glued them in place. For paint, I can't film outside due to weather, but I used my heat gun to seal the foam, which also helps take away the fuzziness that I talked about earlier. Then I hit it with a few coats of Plasti Dip and some light gray primer. I followed up the primer with blue spray paint, which just so happened to be just about the right color. Wasn't expecting that, but I'll take it. Once the blue paint was completely dry, I brought it back in the house to paint the blade with silver acrylic paint and a sponge brush. I was originally going to use spray paint, but painter's tape wouldn't stick to the blue paint, so I couldn't mask it off. So I gave up and used the brush on acrylic. The spray paint looks a lot more metallic, so that would have been better. But it's fine, it only took about 2 or 3 coats. Then I glued everything together. I start by using super glue to attach the pyramids. By the way, when I started the painting process, I masked off where these would go. Then I figure out where the handle will go and Gorilla Glue that in place. Then I put more Gorilla Glue down the opening of the blade so that I can glue the core and the handle in place. Just be sure to put on that piece that the crossguard sits into that's just above the handle. I also Gorilla Glue the pommel in place, which also I keep forgetting to show. Sorry about that. And I also used a circle of 5mm foam to cap the bottom of the pommel. This is actually on the sword, but I forgot to add it to the template. It's fine if you don't have it though, just remember to not put a hole in the bottom layer if you do that. I let that cure overnight, and then in the morning I hit it with some satin clear coat. Alright, so that's how to make the Master Sword from The Legend of Zelda: A Link Between Worlds. If you like this video, go ahead and give it that thumbs up, subscribe for more, and I'll see you guys later.